Morning. Last Friday, while I was dusting all the bookshelves in my study, a task which took me far longer than it really needed to, than I anticipated, as I kept stopping to read some of the books, like you do, mainly to decide if I needed to still keep some of them, as I tend to have most books on my Kindle these days, owing to the small print in some of the books, especially Bibles. They're so small. I rediscovered this book by John D. Powers, entitled If They Could Speak, 10 Witnesses to the Passion of Jesus. And last Sunday was Passion Sunday. And I was reminded about last week saying about the cross being a very difficult thing to get your head round. It was a symbol of torture and execution, we know, that ultimately represented God's love, for not just then, but for all times. I would like to read you a meditation from the view of the crossmaker. My name is not important. All you need to know is that I am a crossmaker. Along with many other carpenters in the city of Jerusalem, I was pressed into service of carving the crossbeams used for crucifixions by the brutish Romans. What could I do? I had to feed my family. Although I knew full well how the Romans used these beams, I could do nothing to prevent it. Each morning I would go to the hills to cut down the strong pieces of timber and drag them home for carving. Once chiselled, they were piled high in the Romans' courtyard. It was not a task I cherished, but the money put food on the table. Mine was a poor family, and it was my duty to take care of them. How these crossbeams were used was not my responsibility, not mine to question. My first responsibility was always to my wife and children. Oh, when I think back on the days of my apprenticeship, when I first took up the trade of a carpenter, I can recall the joy I felt when carving a table from a coarse piece of heavy wood. I have always felt myself a skilled carpenter. Not the best, perhaps, but one in love with my craft. It is an art, you know, to mould and fashion, from rough beams to smooth and well-fitted piece of furniture. It takes an eye of care and hands of compassion. This may sound strange to you, of those of you who do not know the feel of wood. To be a true carpenter, you must respect the grain and the bend of each and every beam you cut, or it will not fit well. I sound like a dreamer, and I was so many years ago. Then reality hit me with the cruelty of a world gone mad. My ideals seemed to fall away like the bark of a dying tree, with each problem and setback. I became more and more pessimistic and uncaring. Even the love of my craft seemed to slowly crack into splinters of callous indifference. My art became a tool of death, my craft a means of suffering, and I did not seem to care. My friends, it is one thing to say I do not know when finding fault with your actions. It's another thing entirely to know your actions contribute to the heavy burdens placed on the shoulders of another and say, I don't care. Not knowing is ignorance and can be understood. Not caring is the very evil Christ came to overcome. You may wonder why I've come to speak to you today. I, Christ's crossmaker, watched this holy man carry upon his shoulders what I had chiselled with indifference and hewed with arrogance, and I became sick with shame. I beg you, my friends, to watch the suffering Jesus of today's crucifixion walk the steps of passion as innocent children go hungry. Family violences increase, and the helpless are mired into mindless bureaucracy. Watch Jesus nailed to the cross of today's violence as the powerless are victimized by the weapons of Holocaust built out of fear. Watch closely as Christ carries his cross today and ask yourself if by your silent indifference you have helped to carve that cross. If so, put down your hammer of abuse, your blade of debasement, for I guarantee you, no one carves a cross for another to shoulder without one day having to carry it himself. So last week I asked you 2 questions to think about. What do you think about when you see a cross? What does the cross of Christ mean to you? We've all felt the lovely and admired the lovely sort of woodwork carvings that Christ himself would have done, as well as the cross maker. So next time you're out walking and you see a tree, just think of some of the uses that tree has been put to use to. One of them, crucifixion. Amen. Thank you for listening.